9. Ignition sequence.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
1, 0, and liftoff.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle's earned its place in history and it's come to a final stop.
Good afternoon, everybody, from the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. I'm NASA's Josh Byerly. We're going to be taking a look today at a spacewalk that is planned for November 1st, where Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide will step outside to the P6 radiator and correct an ammonia leak that has been spotted out there on the very end of the station's truss structure. Here to give us more details about all this activity is the International Space Station Program Manager, Mike Suffredini, as well as Mike Lammers, who is the NASA Flight Director, who will be inside Mission Control during the activities, as well as Allison Bollinger, a spacewalk officer who she and her team have choreographed the activities for Sonny and Aki. We'll get started with Mike.
Well, good afternoon. As Josh said, we're here to talk to you today at the outset of an EVA. We have been working on a number of power problems over the last several weeks, as everyone's been following along. We had the 3A solar array set was not in the mix for all of the power providing capability that the space station had because of a short that we experienced several weeks ago. The team, over the course of a number of days, slowly reintegrated that system into the set, and it's back with us now. We're actually don't know the root cause. We believe the root cause to be perhaps the short of one of 82 capacitors in the SSU. As a result of that short, we believe that we basically burned out the capacitor, and so now the short is gone. The system the capacitors use for power quality purposes, and missing one of 82 will not really affect the power quality. So we believe we're in a good place with the 3A array, and now we have all 8 channels providing power to the ISS. That's the good news. The bad news is over the last several weeks we have been watching, well, the P6 array, since it's been on orbit, has had a very, very slow leak that we have been monitoring. As you may recall, about a year ago, we recharged one of the systems out there because of this leak. That's a normal capability that we have on ISS. The leak is amazingly slow. You couldn't see it if you were sitting on top of it, and so really the better part of valor is just let the system slowly leak down and recharge it, as we've done. That process was to occur about once every 4 or 5 years, and since we're outside for EVAs every so often anyway, that was the right position to be in. However, in about the June time frame, we noticed that the leak rate picked up substantially. And over the course of, and I say substantial, again, you're talking about a very slow leak in terms of leaks in general, and so it takes several weeks, if not months, to decide exactly what the leak rate is in a system like this. That also, not only is it got a very, very slow leak, we go through temperature changes regularly in these loops, and so it's very hard to get the actual leak rate without quite a bit of trend data. But anyway, over 2 or 3 months, we determined that the leak rate was such that we'd get low enough that the system would shut itself down, probably in the late December, early January timeframe. Since that time, as we've continued to watch the leak, it looks like we could probably go another month or two. But the data does indicate that we're going to leak down to a point where we will eventually have the system will shut down to protect itself. And so the decision has been made to go ahead and send Sonny and Aki outside. We don't know exactly where the leak is. It's possible the leak is in the PBR itself, the radiator itself. It could be in the pump system, or it could be in any one of the lines. And so a leak rate this small, it's not like you can just take something out of the set while the crew's outside and then have them wait a couple minutes and you see where the leak is fixed or not, and then you go work on the next thing. As I said before, it takes weeks, maybe months, to see if you've affected the leak rate. So the first thing we're going to do, and We'll talk about it more here with the folks on the panel with me, but the object here is to go hook up to another array we have that's out there on the P6 truss and was utilized, as we call it, the early system way back in the day when we first started flying the space station, and then see we can operate the loop this way, so we'll operate the channel this way and see if the leak stays with us or not, and then based on what that tells us, we'll decide if we have to do anything else outside. It's conceivable that if the leak is in the radiator itself, we could just stay in this configuration and operate off the radiator that's was originally intended for the early ammonia system. So that's what we're going to go outside to tackle here in the next few days, actually November 1st. Between now and then, of course, we've just got the next crew on board with us. The next crew and fish are on board with us, and everyone is doing well, including the fish. We have our next major operation on board ISS is the return of the Dragon capsule. That returns on Sunday. I think we release it about 8:26 in the morning Central Time Sunday, and it lands or splashes down, I think, about 2:20-ish in the afternoon that day. At least that's the current plan. So this all occurs on Sunday. Then right before the EVA on the 31st, 49 Progress will launch into a 4-orbit rendezvous with station. And so it'll launch and dock on the 31st, and then, of course, the next day after that, we'll do the EVA. So we got a pretty busy period, but this is the right time to do this EVA. Sunny and Aki both have just been outside. The suits are all sized for them. They have experience, of course, very recent experience outside. Sunny actually helped stow this particular radiator that we're going to deploy, and has quite a bit of experience with these QDs that we have to manipulate outside. And so for those reasons, we think it makes sense to go ahead and let them go out before they come home and take care of this for us. So that's the intent. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mike, who will go into more detail on the EVA.
Okay, thanks, Mike. EVA 20 will be on Thursday, November 1st, as Mike mentioned. The egress will be at 7:15 a.m. Central Time, and the EVA is expected to last nominally about 6.5 hours. Just a review of our crew that's on board. We have Sonny Williams, Aki Hoshide, and Yuri Malenchenko. And they came up on Soyuz TMA-5M, which was launched on July 14th, docked to Rosvet on July 17th, and the EVA will occur in their 107th day on board of ISS. And of course, we just acquired a new crew, Kevin Ford, Oleg Novitsky, and Evgeny Turelkin, and they launched on Soyuz TMA-6M back on the 23rd. They docked to Poisk yesterday morning, and the EVA will occur on their 7th day in space. Just to review the current config of the vehicle, actually the config of the EVA, Progress 48 will be on the nadir side at the Pirs docking module. Soyuz TMA-5M, as I mentioned, is at Rosvet on the nadir side of the FGB. Soyuz TMA-6M is docked at Poisk, and Progress 49 will arrive at the SM aft about 24 hours before the EVA, and that's again a 4-orbit launch and dock. Just kind of an overview of the power system on board ISS, and Mike did a really excellent job of kind of describing the issues that we're working with. We have 8 power channels on board the ISS, and it's basically one for each one of those solar arrays that you see. And of course, as we go through the eclipse period in the orbit, we have a pretty good complement of batteries and other equipment that gives us power when we're going through the Earth's shadow. Each one of those 8 channels has its own cooling system, and it's actually separate from sort of the big cooling systems on board the vehicle that we had to repair with an EVA a few years ago. I call it sort of the little brother. There's 8 of them. Each one consists of a pump, also known as the PFCS, the pump flow control system, that's got a pump and some valves in it. There's a radiator to cool the ammonia, and you can see that going out towards the bottom of the screen there, and then a series of tubes and cold plates to pick up the heat. Each photovoltaic module, P6, P4, S4, and S6, each has 2 power channels, and as I described, 2 photovoltaic thermal control systems. And they're separate. There's 8 of them, but kind of one of the details is that radiator is shared between 2 systems. So what you see there with that one radiator, it's got the tubing for all of P6 for both the 2 Bravo power channel, which we're looking at fixing here, and 4 Bravo. And so the systems are separate, but they go through that same radiator. Again, we mentioned the 2 Bravos on P6. That's way out there on the port side. And that was the first array that was launched a number of years ago. And if you remember, it actually used to live up on the zenith side of the vehicle. And we moved that from the top of the Z1 truss in the zenith out to the end of P5, where it currently lives as part of STS-120 back in October of 2007. So as Mike mentioned, we've had this very slow leak on the PVTCS since 2007, and again, I like to sort of characterize it as a leak that I had in my air conditioning system a number of years ago, where it's about every 2 years I got to put more Freon on the system, and it's not something that's immediately obvious. And again, something if it's slow enough that we can go ahead and feed. And if you go ahead and look at the next slide here. This is actually a really good comparison of the 2 Bravo channel, which is the one with the leak, and the 4 Bravo, which is in blue and has been tight. And you can see that we normally run just over 50 pounds of ammonia in the system. And you can see as we trend it out over several years, we have a very slow leak. And again, it's really, you need to look at it over weeks and months to sort of determine what the trend is. You can see over there towards the right, where we actually did the recharge on STS-134, and that was done on EVA2 with Drew Feustel and Mike Fink. They put 8 pounds into the system. Both Drew and Mike have been really a great asset. They've been helping us a lot with this EVA, and Mike will actually be the Capcom during the EVA, sitting to my right. Again, you can see on the right side of that we saw an increase in the rate. And if you look at the conservative sort of worst case, as Mike mentioned, it'd be in early next year that we'd hit the minimum. They tell me the minimum's about, on that chart, calibrated to that chart, is about 40 pounds. And again, the trick is it takes some time to trend that line and figure out where it's going. So kind of on a big picture of the EVA, and Allison has got some great graphics that she'll go through. But again, we mentioned that the leak is most likely in either the PFCS, the pump flow control system, or the radiator. They're both ORUs. They both can be isolated from the systems. We're real suspicious of the radiator just because of, you saw it kind of stretches out there and it's susceptible to micrometeoroid impacts. And again, the goal of this EVA is to isolate the PVR from the system by closing an EVA actuated disconnect. By doing that and kind of watching the quantity that's in the radiator that's cut off from the rest of the system, as well as the remainder of the system, we can kind of determine if that leak is in the PVR or the PFCS side. As Mike mentioned, we have a spare radiator, and the way that we'll use that spare radiator is we'll use these jumpers that were used to help fill on 134, and we will connect up that spare radiator to the 2 Bravo cooling system. And those jumpers are actually dry now. There's no ammonia in them. We'll just get them into the right position, and we'll go ahead and open them up, and that will just tie the current cooling system to that extra radiator that we have. That spare radiator, again, was part of the old EETCS, or the early external thermal control system that was used primarily when that truss was up on the zenith side of the vehicle. We deactivated that in the winter of 2006 and 2007, and during EVA 7, we put that radiator away. That EVA was done by Mike Lopez Alegria and conveniently enough, Sunny Williams, who will be doing this EVA, and it's been real helpful to get her take and what she remembers, and she remembers quite a bit about the work site and her experience with putting that radiator away. It's just a real nice video. Of course, we'll be going in the reverse direction when we do the EVA itself, maybe. But again, if the leak was in the PVR and we got that new radiator on the system, we can leave it there long term. Even if we don't isolate the leak, that old system has got quite a bit of additional ammonia in it, and of course, when the systems are tied together, we'll essentially get a free recharge out of the system, which can also buy us quite a bit more run time while we evaluate the next steps if we continue to monitor a slow leak there. So that's sort of the big picture of the current state of the power system and our overall goals for the EVA. And of course, Allison Bollinger has been doing just an outstanding job with her team, putting together a really well put together EVA, and we've gotten tremendous help from the engineering community as well, and just everyone's been outstanding. So I'll give it off to Allison. You can tell us all about it.
All right, thanks, Mike. So as Mike and Mike have both mentioned, our EVA is next Thursday, November 1st, with an egress time of approximately 7:15 a.m. The two crew members performing the EVA are once again ISS Commander Sunny Williams and Aki Hoshide. So if we can go to the first graphic, there we go. So Sunny Williams comes to us as our lead spacewalker, and she's also currently the top female spacewalker. She has just over 44 hours of EVA time that she has earned over 6 EVAs. And as Mike mentioned, 2 of those EVAs were actually spent out on the P6 truss, so she's very familiar with this work site. She will be wearing the suit with the red stripes, and this will be her 7th EVA. EV2 will be Aki Hoshide. He's the top JAXA spacewalker right now. He has a total of 14 hours and 45 minutes of EVA time that he earned in 2 EVAs just a little while ago that he performed with Sunny at the end of August and the beginning of September. He'll be wearing the suit with the white stripes, and this will be his 3rd EVA. The newly arrived flight engineer Kevin Ford will be our IV assistant. He will help the crew with their prep activities, which includes the in-suit light exercise or IL pre-breathe protocol that the 2 crew members will be using for this spacewalk. This is the same pre-breathe protocol that they used on both EVAs 18 and 19, so they are very familiar with it. Once the pre-breathe is complete, Kevin will assist in getting the crew members into the equipment lock. He'll shut up the hatch and then assist in the depress of that crew lock. And then once the depress is complete and the crew is ready to head outside, Kevin will hand the control over to Mike Fink, as other Mike mentioned, hand over to Mike Fink, who will be the ground IV, and then he will take the crew through their planned timeline activities. And then once the EVA is complete, Mike will hand back over to Kevin inside the vehicle, and Kevin will help get the crew inside the airlock, repress the airlock, and then assist in any ammonia decontamination procedure should the crew get contaminated during this procedure. So we can go ahead and talk through the overview tasks of this EVA. So you could, as you know, big picture, as everyone mentioned, the idea here is to isolate the 2B loop that's currently flowing through the photovoltaic radiator, or PVR. So we go about doing that by driving the FQDC, or the fluid quick disconnect coupling. So we'll demate that. And then while that's going on, we'll also be taking some pictures of the currently deployed radiator as well as the integrated equipment assembly adjacent to it to see if we can see any other signs of a possible MMOD strike that could account for this leak. We will then perform the early ammonia servicer, or EAS, jumper reconfiguration, and then the 2 crew members will work together to deploy that radiator, which is the trailing thermal control, or ticker radiator, as you'll hear me describe it in just a little bit. There's a shroud currently covering that, so we'll stow the shroud, and the 2 crew will work together to deploy that radiator. We'll also have the crew remain at the work site to assist in a manual EVA deploy of that radiator if the ground commands are unsuccessful. So we can go ahead and start the first video. Okay, so the crew members will egress the ISS joint airlock. Aki will remain at the airlock while Sunny will start making her way port on the ISS truss. She will make a pit stop at the midpoint of P1, where she will establish the 2 crew members' safety tether anchor hooks. The crew will be using safety tether packs, which consists of 2 85-foot tethers ganged together. Once Aki's tether is secure, he'll translate aft to the Z1 starboard toolbox to retrieve a 12-inch socket extension that we'll need for the EVA's activities. Once Sunny has established her anchor point, she'll continue to head outboard along face 1 to P3, and then she'll make her way aft and zenith around the Sarge, and then she'll translate along the zenith aft edge of P4 out to P5 and to the midpoint of P6, and she'll take the valley between the ticker and the sticker, which is the starboard radiator. Once she's out at the work site, she'll then make her way to the ISS forward face of P6, and there she will set up camp and she will start work initially on the EAS jumper reconfig. She'll continue working on that until Aki has retrieved the socket and followed the same translation path out to Sunny. Once Aki's out there, he'll install the socket on the PGT or the pistol grip tool, and the 2 crew members will work together to release the 4 fasteners that are currently holding the shroud that's flashing, or the cover in place that's currently protecting the fluid quick disconnect coupling. Once the cover is out of the way, Sunny will get in place to drive that FQDC bolt, and that's about 7 turns. And so here we can see a flight photo of the FQDC itself. So as Mike's have mentioned, there are actually 2 loops that are currently running through this radiator. The 2B side is on the left and the 4B side is on the right. So Sunny knows, drive the one on the left, don't touch the one on the right. So she's going to use a PGT with a 12-inch socket extension to drive that, and we do have some NBL footage of that task being accomplished. So once she gets in position, Aki will hand her the PGT and she'll get to work. As I mentioned, it's a 12-inch socket on this bolt, and we're only driving this bolt 7 turns. And what that action is doing is it's physically separating the active and passive halves of this FQDC, and it's closing the valves for both the supply and return ammonia flow path to the 2B side of this radiator. And this is the first time we have actuated one of these FQDCs on orbit. Once they're complete with the 7 turns, they will work together to reinstall the shroud and cover and those 4 fasteners that are holding it in place. And then Sunny will get to work completing the rest of the EAS jumper reconfiguration. So you've seen this graphic before. So the left side shows what the current configuration is. The red FHO2 hose is the one that we actually used on the ULF-6 refill approximately a year and a half ago. It had ammonia in it, and we've since vented it, and it's wire tied off on one end to the FHO1 hose. That FHO1 hose currently has a nitrogen pad, and the last time it has been touched was actually by Sonny Williams and Mike Lopez Alegria during those Expedition 14 EVAs when they installed this jumper in its current location. So we have some additional NBL footage showing this task. So here you can see part of the reconfig's already complete. So Sunny's reconfigured the jumpers in the lower part of the screen while she was waiting for Aki to arrive with a 12-inch socket. And then her next task is to demate the FHO1 jumper from the M9 male so she can vent that nitrogen pad from the jumper. Once she gets the jumper demated, she'll work on mating it to the nitrogen vent tool. Once the vent tool is mated, she opens the female quick disconnect on that jumper, and then she'll vent that nitrogen, and that vent should only take just a few seconds. Once she's complete with the vent, she'll demate the nitrogen tool from that jumper, stow it away, and then install that FHO1 jumper on the M10 male. And then she'll work to reconfigure the FHO2 jumper onto the M9 male. So then we'll end up with the post-EVA configuration shown on the right, where the red FHO2 jumper is what's supplying your chilled ammonia from the new radiator, or the old, newly deployed radiator, into the 2B PVTCS system, and then the blue jumper FHO1 is supplying your ammonia that's been warmed by the batteries and the other equipment out on the IEA back to your radiator for cooling. So once she's complete with the EAS jumper reconfig, she'll go over to help Aki. So meanwhile, Aki has been taking the photos I mentioned of the radiator as well as the IEA, and he's also been working on stowing a shroud that's currently covering the ticker radiator. This shroud is a thin beta cloth material. It's permanently attached on the inboard or left side of this image, and then it's attached by 2 hooks on the outboard side. It was installed by sliding it along 2 guide straps that run on the top and the bottom of the radiator. So Aki will work to release one of the integrated hooks, and he'll slide it as far inboard as he can. He'll secure that, and then he'll translate to the other side of the radiator, or the top side of the radiator in this image, and he'll work to shimmy that down as far as he can until he reaches some interference, and then he'll just continue going back and forth around the radiator until he gets the shroud all the way inboard. And once he gets it inboard, he will secure it with wire ties to hold it in place, and it's around this time that Sunny should be complete with her EAS jumper work, so she'll make her way to the aft side of P6 to help Aki with that shroud stow. and then the 2 crew members will work together to release the 6 cinches, which you can see flashing in this image, that are currently holding the radiator in its stowed config. They'll first release the inboard and outboard cinches and stow those in their stowage clips, and then they'll release the 4 side cinches and stow those. Once they're complete with the cinch release, they'll release the 2 final winch pip pins, which are holding the radiator in its stowed position. Once they release those winch pip pins, Aki will make his way inboard, and Sunny will make her way to the outboard edge of the radiator. She'll verify that all tools, tethers, and EV crew members are clear of the radiator deployment envelope, and then she'll give the ground the go to issue the command to deploy the radiator. She'll hang tight as the radiator is deploying, grab her camera, and take a few pictures of that deployment. And as I mentioned, the manual drive bolt is located right there near her work site, so in the event that the ground deploy isn't successful, she can help out with her pistol grip tool to manually deploy that radiator. As she's cleaning up her work site and taking a few more photographs, Aki is translating back to the airlock along the same translation path that he took outboard. Once he's at the airlock, he'll establish a waist tether as the new safety tether for the pair. Sunny will start making her way inboard. She'll make a stop at the midpoint of P1 where she had anchored their safety tethers. She'll pick those tethers up, make her way back to the airlock as well, and then they'll close the hatch on a successful 6.5-hour EVA. And the last image I'd like to leave you with is what I'm calling Sunny's deja vu. As Mike mentioned, Sunny stowed this radiator during Expedition 14, and now she's going to be redeploying it. So hopefully she will enjoy seeing this image once again, with the exception of the Russian segment behind P6. But with that, that's all I have, and I'll hand it back to Josh.
Okay, let's take some questions here in Houston first, and we'll go to the phone lines. Let's start out with Gina.
I don't know who wants to take this, but this is sort of like a detective trip, going out there first to see if they can figure out where the leak is coming from, and then you'll proceed from there?
Yes, that's correct. What we'll do is, because we don't know exactly where the leak is, this affords us an opportunity to regain the loop while we check to see if we've taken care of the leak or not. And so what this will tell us is whether the radiator is the cause of the leak. If it turns out the leak continues, well, we have a little time because the loop will continue to operate. But as Mike said, when we filled this system a year ago, the result of that fill was also fill up the early ammonia system as well. And so we have extra ammonia in that loop. So it buys us a little time. It helps us isolate the PVR, lets us isolate the PVR to see if that's the cause. If that turns out not to be the cause, then we have to think about the next steps. And there was one point we contemplating going outside. You can isolate all of those. You could isolate the pump, the PVR, and the lines. You have to keep the system shut down. But again, it takes you several weeks to figure out what's leaking and if it's leaking. So the next step after this, if we're still leaking, like I said, we've bought ourselves some time. We'll go think about what we want to do next, whether we want to try to isolate the other 2 systems and just have the system shut down for a while, whether we want to just go and proactively R&R the pump and see if that fixes the problem. So we have some forward work to do after this. As Mike said, and many of us believe, if you look at pictures of the ISS, you'll find MMOD hits on 2 or 3 of them in 2 or 3 locations. So it's entirely possible that the leak source is a hit to this particular PVR. So this gives us at least that. It'll tell us if that's the cause or not, and then we can decide later if it's not that, what we do next.
If it is a micrometeorite hit, I mean, some of those are so small, you really can't do much to anticipate those. What do you do to defend yourself against something that's that tiny a hit? Or how tiny a hit would it have to be to cause a leak?
Well, this leak's really small. Like, the actual point at where you're leaking is probably around the width of your hair, perhaps even smaller than that. So it's a very, very tiny leak. We may not even see it. If it's a direct hit and that's as small as the hole is, we won't see it. If it's a glancing blow, and at the deepest point you manage to cut into the line, then maybe you'll see it because you have the glancing blow. And the design of ISS was built to withstand these kinds of hits, and in these systems, it was the redundancy of the systems that gave us that capability. And so, if it turns out to be an MMOD hit, this is exactly the way the design was meant to deal with it. And we could live without this power system for the time it would take us to go outside and change out a pump or a radiator or whatever. So that's that. You know, the rest of the pressurized modules have shielding around them for the smaller MMOD, and then for the larger, of course, we protect ourselves with the help of the Stratcom folks who let us know when we have a potential conjunction.
Robert.
Robert Perlman with ClickSpace. Again, for who wants to take it, if you by chance do see the MMOD strike, if Sunny gets out there and the sun's at the right angle and you happen to see it, does that change anything with this spacewalk in terms of activities that you would do? And if it is an MMOD hit, would you consider bringing the radiator back on a future SpaceX Dragon to study, and do you have an extra radiator out there to replace it?
Let's see. We have an extra radiator, it's the one we're using. We have 2 spare PBRs. They're the one we're deploying to use, and the other one that Allison referred to as the sticker. So those are our spare PBR radiators. We have 1 spare central system radiator also that sits on one of the external pallets outside. If we saw what we thought was the hole, it wouldn't stop what we're doing, because we're going into a configuration that we can operate from indefinitely. And so we'd go, wow, that's interesting, and gee whiz, and we would assume that this is going to solve our leak problem. We would continue with the configuration, and as I said, we could stay like this indefinitely. So that's probably what we do. And then we'd have the conversation about, do we want to go to all the trouble to move a radiator, because that's not a simple process. And I don't have a capability to return a radiator today. So.
Mark.
Thanks, Mark Carreau for Aviation Week. I have a couple of questions. Does anybody know the dimension of the radiator you'll be deploying?
I don't know it exactly. We can get you that number. How long does it take to deploy? With
7
the PGT?
minutes. Oh, with the PGT?
Yeah. I remember it's about 1 second a foot at the PGT. So just guessing, I would say it's probably 30 or 40 feet.
I think it's 45 feet long, about 17 feet or 15 feet wide. I'm not sure what the other dimension is.
And I just wanted to follow up on the spare question and make sure I understood. Sorry, you do have an undeployed spare radiator. Is that the case that was taken up during the last series of shuttle missions to give you spares?
That's the central system radiator. They're much bigger than these PBRs, so they're different radiators. So we have one of those. That's the one you're thinking of. We flew it up on the second to the last flight, I think, on a pallet. Anyway, one of the last flights that took the pallets up. I think it was the last flight. In fact, we took the pallet up, had it on there. And then for the PBR system, the spares, the intended spares, were the 2 early ammonia system radiators, one of which we're going to deploy.
If you replace this and you still see the leak trend, do you have some time, or are you kind of back in a contingency EVA mode where you have to go out and do something before the end of December, early January? I guess I'm just trying to sort of figure out where you go if, after you replace this, it sounds like it may take a few weeks to determine whether you have a leak or not, and then if you do, you're sort of bumping up against the deadline you spoke of sooner. So that's the gist of my question.
Right, and as we talked about, so there's more ammonia now that's been brought to bear, so we can go a little longer at the leak rate. It's not completely clear to us the actual leak rate, so it may be a little bit slower. So we've probably bought ourselves, just because we have the extra ammonia, we probably bought ourselves a few months to work and think about it.
October, based on
there you go.
Trending. And of course, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that, but using the number that had them lasting until December or January, I think they told me October. And again, lots of assumptions go into that number, but it is better, and I think that's the message.
Okay, is that it from here? Let's go to the phone lines. We'll come back here. Let's see. We have Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Yeah, a couple of real quick ones from me. I think you just answered that. My first question which is how long you could last. And Mike, I guess you're saying if nothing changed and it all stayed the same, you've got till next fall to figure something out.
which, by the way, you'll have to there's a lot of mics involved with this EVA. So maybe you should call me Mike, and we'll defer to Mr. Suffredini here. But
I'll be sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
But I think your question was, if we did nothing, how long could we last? Once we've reconfigured, how long we could last? It's longer. It depends on the assumptions that you use, and we think it's until October.
Okay, thanks. And another quick one for me. How does an MMOD hit explain the change in the leak rate? Since you had a small leak rate at first and there was a change of some sort, would that not imply 2 leaks?
That's what that would imply, correct. So we had the existing leak that we've been feeding. Don't know exactly where it is. Might be at a QD connection. Don't know. But anyway, we've been feeding it. Most of us don't believe that that leak has gotten worse. So that was in the fault tree, though, is the possibility that whatever was causing that leak has now grown for reasons that we couldn't exactly explain. And so that is certainly one of the possible causes. But most of us kind of leaning towards the MMOD impact just because it's a more likely scenario.
Okay, and finally from me, following up on Mark Carreau's question, the early ammonia coolant system 2 radiators you mentioned that are out on P6, can they be moved if a PVR on some other module got damaged down the road?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim Oberg with NBC.
Yeah, hi, this is for Mr. Suffredini. Hello. And I've gotten all the technical questions answered on the EVA, so thank you. Is it my impression that this last launch last week was the first U.S. launch from the new pad, or the old pad rather? And if it was, what did it look like? How different was it than watching it from the Gagarin pad?
Well, Jim, I have to tell you, I wasn't at this particular launch. I divide that responsibility with my boss, who was nice enough to go this time, so I wasn't there to witness it. It was the first human launch from that pad, is my understanding, at least for many, many years, if it hasn't been forever. My understanding in talking to my colleagues is that you're much further away than you are when you're at pad 1. So it was a different view. It's also a much longer trip to get out to the pad. But you'd have to ask, next time you get Gerst in front of a camera, you might ask him what he thought of the view.
Yeah, or get him off camera. No problem. Yeah, it was about 40 years ago in the early 70s, or there were a couple of Soyuz manned launches, but you're right, it's been about 40 years. Okay, well, take that real good, and maybe we'll both go to watch the next one.
I'd be glad to do that with you.
Okay, let's go to Mike Wall with Space.com.
Oh yeah, hi guys. Thanks for doing this. This is just sort of a basic question. Could you put into just like a little perspective? I mean, is this a more challenging spacewalk than the average space? I mean, I know there's no such thing as an average one, but could you just kind of tell us? I mean, is this one going to be really challenging, really technically difficult in like some ways that you haven't experienced before? I mean, I'd just like a little perspective on what to expect with this one.
I'll let Allison handle some of the technical stuff, but it's different. Some of these recent spacewalks that we've been doing, of course, are outside of the shuttle era, and it's been different just from a big picture perspective in that this crew didn't know that they were doing that particular spacewalk when they launched, and in fact didn't know until about 3 weeks ago. So it's interesting from the point of view of getting the Sonny and Aki ready on orbit and getting them briefing packages and talking through things and getting them trained when we don't have the opportunity that we had with shuttle crews where we'd all go out to the NBL, we'd work through the procedures and then sit around on the table and talk about how things went. We have to take a little bit different approach when it comes to just getting ready overall and getting these guys ready to go out the door. So that's it from the big picture perspective, and maybe Allison's got a few things on the technical end.
I would say this is an average skill level EVA, maybe slightly more challenging than your average EVA. The thing that we have going for us is that Sunny is very experienced with fluid quick disconnects. That would be the one task in my mind that's more complicated, is we do have quite a bit of fluid quick disconnect manipulation during this EVA. But since Sunny has seen these exact jumpers and QDs during increment 14, and she also experienced quite a bit of QD action during her Z1 work during these same EVAs, I feel like she has a leg up on the competition because she's done all this stuff before. The other thing that's a little more challenging is, as I mentioned, this is the first time that we've operated one of those fluid quick disconnect couplings, or the FQDC. So that mechanism does look sort of intimidating, but we've got an agreement that we only need to turn it just enough turns to close the valves. So that shouldn't be that bad. And the rest of the tasks, the radiator deploy, we've done those quite a few times over the years. So we have a good experience base to pull from. So I feel like that task shouldn't be too challenging either.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Let's see, do we have an Edward with JIJ Press?
Yeah, I don't really have a question at this time, though. Everything's been answered, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's come back here to Houston and see if there's any follow-ups. Mark?
Mark for Aviation Week. I have a Dragon question, if that's okay. Could you, as best you know now, are you still looking at December for the next flight? And will the first stage propulsion issue, as best you know now, have any bearing on the scheduling, or do you have some flexibility in flying that flight if it is, in terms of delivering needed supplies or bringing things back?
Well, let's see, that flight, you're talking about SpaceX 2. The SpaceX 2 flight is currently in January. They were supposed to move the first stage, it's kind of all coming together, but I thought it was early last week. We have agreed together to leave the stage in McGregor for a little while the team tries to get to root cause of the anomaly. My understanding is we probably have about another week or so before we start pushing the launch date. So that's kind of rough. I'm trying to remember in my head those exact dates, and they're not coming to me. So we have a little bit of flexibility before we start affecting the launch date. The launch date itself in January is not really critical to the program from a supply standpoint. So we have some flexibility. My understanding, however, is that pushing that flight pushes SpaceX, the next SpaceX flight to ISS, SpaceX 3, because they're going to the new version of the Falcon 9 launch vehicle. They have to modify the pad and do some things to get ready, and they have some other flights before ours on the new Falcon. So, so any movement of that vehicle to the right, although not an impact to us from a logistics standpoint for that flight, does impact the next flight to ISS, at least today. That's on paper, it looks that way. I'm sure there's some things they can do to make up a little bit of that. So there is a possibility that resolving this anomaly will move the Falcon, the SpaceX 2 flight a little bit, and it can move, from our perspective, from a logistics perspective, we're in really good shape on orbit, so we could move quite a bit to the right and not really be impacted by it. So we've got plenty of time to sort out the root cause. The team's doing an excellent job. We've got a lot of folks involved with our SpaceX friends to try to get to root cause. They're reporting back to us weekly as we try to sort through it. And as soon as we have something we can hang our hat on, we'll go look at the stage we got at McGregor and see if it is susceptible to that failure mode, and then we'll know more about the impact of the next flight.
Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up one more on the Dragon, the current Dragon mission. I think it was sort of noted that the payload was light. That's my term. I'm not accusing anyone of saying that, but do you anticipate, I mean, was that sort of part of the plan, that you could be that flexible, or would you anticipate that the missions would carry more payload up in the future? Or I guess I'm not quite sure how you...
Yeah, I'll be glad to address that. We have bought a certain amount of up mass, 20 metric tons, over 12 flights, and we will get 20 metric tons over 12 flights. We loaded up the International Space Station with the last few shuttle launches in order to have flexibility and launch and logistics needs. So as these flights move to the right, we would be able to accommodate it. So we work with all of our partners, and SpaceX is one of them. And our SpaceX folks were able to carry more capacity on that vehicle had we needed it, but we didn't have a need for more upmass. So they came and said, if you don't need the upmass, we have another customer that we'd like to carry up, which we agreed to. That was the Orbcomm folks. Flying Orbcomm meant you also flew some ballast. So when you talk about the mass of the Orbcomm and the total capability of the SpaceX vehicle, you can't say, wow, what happened to the missing upmass? There was a ballasting issue associated with that they also took care of. But they flew up the upmass that we needed them to. That is all that counts towards the upmass that we procured. And in compensation for that, they put some more capability on future spacecraft because we were flexible with them. And what they gave us in return, while still maintaining the total upmass that they're due over the 12 flights, was the capability to bring home even more powered stowage coming down, which is a critical need for us to keep our life sciences logistics flow return up and down taken care of. So it was a very big compensation for the agency in that respect, and it also was a big help for SpaceX because they were able to take care of their other customer. So it's mutually agreed to. We still have all the same upmass we had planned to. We didn't need this upmass, and we got extra capability out of the vehicle, so it was an agreed to change.
Okay. Robert? Just one quick follow-up on the radiator. Just remembering deploying of long-packed solar arrays. Is there any stickage issues, and is there any concern if there are stickage issues? Do you have tools set up to try to free that?
Sure, okay.
Or I'll do it too. Well, one thing is it's not a solar array. So the mechanism is, we were very careful about solar arrays, and solar arrays are considerably more flexible on the mechanism. It's this scissors mechanism, and it doesn't really stick. We've never had issues with deployments or retractions, and we've done them a bunch of times on these radiators.
Okay, Gina, anything? Okay, just going to wrap it up for us. We want to remind you that our coverage on November 1st will begin at 6:15 a.m. Central Time. That's going to be 7:15 a.m. Eastern Time. The spacewalk itself, as you heard, will begin about an hour later at 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time, and of course we'll have live coverage of the entire thing. Another programming reminder, coming up this Sunday, we will have live coverage of the farewell and departure of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. Our coverage will begin at 6 a.m. Central Time. The actual release will take place almost 2.5 hours later at 8:26 a.m. Central. We will wrap up our coverage soon after Dragon actually departs the vicinity of the orbiting complex, but the deorbit burn for Dragon will take place at 1:28 p.m. Central, with a splashdown about 250 miles off the coast of California around 2:20 p.m. Central Time. We will not have that live on NASA television, but you can follow the latest in terms of the deorbit burn and the confirmation of the splashdown on both SpaceX's website and the NASA website, which you can access at www.nasa.gov/station. We want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here Sunday for coverage of Dragon.
Ein Hurrikan der Kategorie 1. Mittlerweile wurde er aber herabgestuft auf einen tropischen Sturm, allerdings mit riesigen Ausmaßen. Momentan fegt er mit etwa 110 km/h nördlich der Bahamas entlang. Auch an der Ostküste der USA sind Flutwellen bis zu 2 Meter und Regenfälle bis zu 150 Liter pro Quadratmeter möglich. Die Zugrichtung, ja, parallel zur amerikanischen Ostküste. Dann dreht er sich aber langsam ein Richtung Festland. Anfang nächster Woche dann die Ankunft an der Ostküste und höchstwahrscheinlich ist dann auch New York betroffen sowie die angrenzenden Bundesstaaten. Die Gefahren, ja, neben dem Wind vor allem auch der kräftige Regen. Stellenweise können bis zu 300 Liter pro Quadratmeter rund um New York runterkommen.
Ein Oktober in Weiß, das hat es seit Jahrzehnten nicht mehr gegeben. Ungewöhnlich früh fiel in weiten Teilen Deutschlands der erste Schnee, wie hier in Thüringen. Nur eine Woche nach den letzten sommerlichen Temperaturen freuen sich die Kinder über den Schnee und manche, wie hier in Bayern, sind einfach nur verwundert.
Bei einer Protestaktion gegen die russische Regierung hat die Polizei in Moskau mehrere führende Oppositionelle vorübergehend festgenommen. Laut Innenministerium wurden sie wegen Störung der öffentlichen Ordnung abgeführt. Die Demonstranten werfen dem Geheimdienst vor, einen Kreml-Gegner entführt und gefoltert zu haben.
Direkt vor dem russischen Geheimdienstgebäude in Moskau haben sich einige hundert Menschen versammelt. Protestaktion gegen politische Unterdrückung in Russland. Von dort verteilen sie sich in der Innenstadt. Auch der Oppositionelle Sergei Udazow macht mit. Gegen ihn läuft gerade eine Anklage wegen Planung von Massenaufständen. Darauf stehen bis zu 10 Jahre Haft. Ich glaube, dass es wichtig ist, dass jetzt alle auf die Straße gehen. Denn bald schon können sie jeden von uns, der sich politisch engagiert, einfach so vor Gericht zerren. Einer seiner Mitstreiter, Leonid Razvoschajew, soll Ende vergangener Woche gewaltsam aus der Ukraine entführt worden sein von maskierten Männern. Jetzt sitzt er in diesem Moskauer Gefängnis. Auch gegen ihn wurde Anklage erhoben. Sagen Sie allen, dass ich gefoltert wurde, 2 Tage lang. Sie haben mich entführt aus der Ukraine. Der friedliche Protest heute endete auch mit Festnahmen. Sergei Udazow und andere wurden wegen Störung der öffentlichen Ordnung abgeführt und in diese Polizeiwache gebracht. Die russische Opposition gerät zunehmend unter Druck. Gegen viele führende Oppositionelle laufen Anklagen und Ermittlungsverfahren. Und die juristischen Möglichkeiten werden laufend erweitert. Gerade wurde ein neues Gesetz auf den Weg gebracht, das Anklagen wegen Hochverrats erleichtert.
In der Europäischen Union und einigen Nachbarstaaten endet in der Nacht die Sommerzeit. In Deutschland und den meisten anderen Ländern werden die Uhren am frühen Sonntagmorgen zurückgestellt von 3 auf 2 Uhr. Die sogenannte Winterzeit ist die Normalzeit. Die Sommerzeit wurde erst 1980 eingeführt, um das Tageslicht länger zu nutzen.
This is NASA television.
This is Mission Control Houston. Welcome to NASA Television's live coverage of the departure of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. This is a live look inside the station's control room here at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. Today on console, the flight director is Ron Spencer. He and his team will be monitoring the progress of today's activities and working with the SpaceX team in Hawthorne, California. Sitting there beside Spencer is veteran astronaut C.J. Sturco. He is serving as today's Capcom. At this point in time, the process for the departure of the Dragon spacecraft has already begun. The bolts are currently being driven away from Dragon, releasing the hard maid in between the space station itself and Dragon. These two spacecraft are currently 251 miles above the Pacific Ocean, about to head over parts of South America. And there you see Dragon during its final couple of hours attached to the International Space Station there on the space station's Harmony node. There on the far left-hand side is the European Columbus laboratory. Just out of view is the Japanese Kibo laboratory, and there at the bottom right-hand side is the U.S. Destiny laboratory with the space station's solar arrays back there in the background. As we mentioned, the bolts are being released in between Dragon and the International Space Station. The next major step will be to begin the process of backing Dragon away from the orbiting complex. That is going to be done via ground command. It's a little bit different than what was done back the early part of this month whenever Dragon arrived at the station. The crew was at the controls for the majority of all the different arm operations that were done. But the ground teams here in Houston are going to be sending the command to automatically move the station's 58-foot-long robotic arm that is currently already attached to Dragon to back the spacecraft away from the orbiting complex, and then the crew will take over at that point in time. The go for release of Dragon should take place around 8:21 a.m. Central Time, a little more than 2 hours from now. At that point, Dragon will be released. It'll be flying by itself. It will conduct the first of its planned back-away maneuvers, firing its jets 1 minute later. And then there'll be a series of burns that will take place soon after that will take Dragon away from the space station complex. It'll cross out of what's called the keep-out sphere, which is an imaginary circle drawn around the station that spacecraft must keep away from. And then it will cross what's known as the approach ellipsoid, which is a wider circle, soon after that as well. And then Dragon will be on its way. That first departure burn should take place at 8:27. The second departure burn a couple of minutes later at 8:29. Dragon will have what's known as a yaw maneuver. It'll spin around basically at 8:35. It'll have another departure burn at 8:36. It'll cross that imaginary circle that we call the keep-out sphere at 8:36 as well. And then it'll cross the approach ellipsoid at 8:39. So all of this, once Dragon gets released, happens fairly rapidly. Dragon's deorbit burn is scheduled for today at 1:28 p.m. Central Time. That is 11:28 a.m. in California. The trunk that you see there at the bottom that has the solar arrays attached to it will be jettisoned at 1:41. Entry interface for Dragon will take place at 1:43. Its drogue chutes will be deployed at 2:11. The main chutes a minute later at 2:12. And then Dragon is currently scheduled to splash down about 250 miles off the coast of California at 2:20 later on today. Now, note about our programming here on NASA television. We will not have live coverage of Dragon's re-entry and splashdown today due to the fact that we don't have any video assets in the air that are tracking the spacecraft. So confirmation of Dragon's successful deorbit burn and its splashdown in the Pacific Ocean will be provided by SpaceX as they watch over their spacecraft as it comes back in. Updates will be available on the SpaceX website at spacex.com and also on the NASA website at www.nasa.gov and nasa.gov/station. So pay attention to those two websites for confirmation of this afternoon's activities. But we'll stay with you today until Dragon departs the space station until we don't see it any longer. We should have some pretty good views of the spacecraft as it backs away and continues on toward its re-entry later on today. There's a live look inside SpaceX's Mission Control Center there in Hawthorne, California. Obviously a very busy day for this team there. And quite a milestone for this team as they watch this end of the first commercial resupply mission that this company has flown. Of course, they've had test flights before, including one back in May up to the International Space Station, but this is the first one that was done under the Commercial Resupply Services contract. So SpaceX now officially joins the other cargo providers up to the International Space Station. The Russians have their Progress vehicle that fly up to the station several times a year, the next one coming up on October 31st. The Japanese have their HTV spacecraft that flies basically once a year, docks to the same place that SpaceX's Dragon is currently attached to, the bottom side of Harmony. And the Europeans have their automated transfer vehicle that flies up several tons of supplies and rendezvous and docks with the Russian segment of the International Space Station, and now the first commercial company, SpaceX, providing missions as well.
Thanks for the tag up, Sonny.
And confirmation from both the crew and the ground teams here that all of the bolts on the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station have been loosened. The crew's been working this since before we came on the air this morning, watching over the systems as these bolts are automatically driven by ground teams. They had quite a bit of last-minute packing to do that was done on Saturday. There's a lot of what they call cold bags inside Dragon. One of the biggest things that Dragon gives NASA and its international partners is the ability to return cargo back to Earth. In some ways, that is almost more important than the actual delivery of the cargo, because SpaceX is the only vehicle that can return a significant amount of cargo and scientific research back to Earth. Of course, this orbiting laboratory is a huge research facility, and getting these samples back to Earth so that the different scientists and researchers can take a look at them is of critical importance. We've not had this capability since the retirement of the space shuttles last year, so there's quite a number of samples on board Dragon that are getting ready to come back home later on today. There's a look at Aki Hoshide and Sonny Williams. Yesterday, as they were finishing up some of the final packing of Dragon, you get a sense of the inside of that spacecraft. You see all the different cargo strapped down there. There is some frozen samples that are put inside a glacier. Glacier is basically a big footlocker that is powered up and is kept at a very cold temperature. All those frozen samples are stored in there, and that is going to be part of the early destow cargo that's going to take place. They're actually going to remove that glacier and some of the other supplies right after Dragon splashes down. So that'll be removed, kept in sort of a powered container, and brought on a fast boat back to the docks where SpaceX's Dragon will ultimately come, but the cargo is going to come back a little bit before the spacecraft. The remainder of the cargo that's inside Dragon will actually come back inside the cargo craft itself. Once Dragon gets back to the docks there near Long Beach, California, they'll do some stabilization of the spacecraft, and then it's going to be trucked to McGregor, Texas, which is where SpaceX has a facility. And then the spacecraft will be processed there, as well as the remainder of the cargo that was not returned early. Again, this is some footage from yesterday as Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide packed some final items inside the Dragon spacecraft. This is before they shut the hatches, but they spent the better part of their morning packing this spacecraft full of the remainder of the items that are coming home. Dragon took up 882 pounds of supplies. The crew made quick work of removing all of that soon after Dragon docked with the space station. It's actually taking home about twice that amount of supplies. It's bringing home 1,673 pounds of cargo, including 163 pounds of crew supplies, 866 pounds of scientific research, the final portions of which Sonny and Aki were packing there, as you see from the video from yesterday, and 518 pounds of hardware. So close to a ton of supplies coming home later on today back to Earth. They exited Dragon around 10:15 a.m. Central Time yesterday. This was Saturday, and then they closed the hatches at about 11 a.m. Central Time. And they have spent the time since then and in the early part of today finishing up what they call a vestibule configuration. That is basically just the common area in between Dragon and the space station. They depressurized that so that the hatches, once they were closed, they could take care of that and also begin the process of actually demating Dragon and undoing these bolts, which they just wrapped up a few minutes ago. That is a look at Brazil from 263 miles above. This team here in Houston is continuing to monitor the progress as the Dragon team in Hawthorne, California works through all these procedures, getting ready for the actual demating of Dragon from the space station coming up here after the 8 o'clock hour, so about another 2 hours from now. It's been a very busy time for the International Space Station with the arrival of Dragon and all the work their crew had to do. There's a brand new set of crew members up on board with Kevin Ford, Evgeny Tarelkin, and Oleg Novitsky arriving this week. Of course, they've got the activity today. The Progress 49 is going to be heading up to the space station at the end of the month on October 31st. As we speak and as we bring you this coverage live on the air, that rocket is being mated down at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It's going to roll out tomorrow, head out to what is known as Site 1. That is the typical launch pad for both Progress and Soyuz vehicles. And it will be bringing up about 2.5 tons of supplies to the International Space Station. Then there's a spacewalk coming up one day later on November 1st, where Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide will venture outside to the P6, that is the port or left-hand side of the space station. These big solar panels that you see there on the far right-hand side have radiators that are very close to them that ammonia is flowed through to keep all the different systems cool and in proper working order. There's always been a small leak on one of those radiators, the P6 radiator as it is known. But that leak rate has sort of increased as of late. So Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide are going to go out there and deploy a spare radiator that has not been used since the early part of the station's life. But there is a spare radiator there that is going to be deployed, and they're sort of going to shunt those ammonia lines and reroute it through that spare radiator to see if that fixes the leak. So quite a bit of traffic going to and from the station. The Dragon's about to head home today. And then, of course, that spacewalk coming up on November 1st. We'll have live coverage of that spacewalk that we just talked about beginning at 6:15 a.m. Central Time on the 1st, 7:15 a.m. Eastern Time. The spacewalk itself is due to begin about an hour later at 7:15 a.m. Central Time. If you missed our briefing on Friday, where Mike Suffredini and Mike Lammers and Allison Bollinger talked about that spacewalk, you can always log on to the NASA website and also the NASA television YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/NASA television, and watch that briefing there and hear them describe the steps that Sonny and Aki are going to be taking later on this week.
You can normalize space ground 2.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll take care of it.
In addition to the 6 members of Expedition 33 that are currently on board the space station, there's been quite a number of other guests coming and going from the space station. Here's a look at some of the spiders on board, which is one of the more unusual experiments that are part of this flight. They're going to be coming home later on today aboard Dragon, so these spiders are getting a free ride home aboard SpaceX's spacecraft. As a piece of trivia, there were some fish that were flown up as well on the Soyuz TMA-06M that took up Novitsky and Tarelkin and Ford earlier this week. the actual aquatic habitat that those fish are going to be living in was flown actually on SpaceX's spacecraft, and then the fish, these Medaka fish, which look like small guppies, were flown. I think there's about 32 of them, were flown up on the Soyuz with the crew earlier this week. So not only does the crew get a new home, but the fish do as well. They're going to be studying how these fish behave in space, how their bodies react, and what the effects of no gravity have on those fish. Of course, there are correlations and extrapolations that can be done between how those fish and other animals and insects react to space and how we do. So they're going to be studying those and hopefully learning quite a bit about it. Here's a look at the current complement of Expedition 33. There's Sunny Williams on the far left-hand side. She is the commander. She has been on board the station with Yuri Malenchenko, the far left-hand side, as well as Aki Hoshide since July. That crew is going to be coming home in the middle of November, landing in Kazakhstan. And then on the far right-hand side, you've got Kevin Ford, who just flew up there with Oleg Novitsky and Evgeny Tarelkin there standing beside him. That crew will be on board until March. Kevin Ford is actually going to become the commander of Expedition 34 once Sunny and Aki and Yuri come home. Once they undock, that actually signals the end of Expedition 33 and the beginning of Expedition 34 under the command of Ford. But those three newest crew members, Ford, Novitsky, and Tarelkin, have been working to get used to their surroundings. That has safety briefing with Sunny and the rest of the crew soon after they got on board. And they're going to spend quite a bit of time in the upcoming week getting some orientation done. This is the first flight for Novitsky and Tarelkin. Kevin Ford flew as the pilot of STS-128, but this is the first time that he's actually lived on board the space station for an extended period of time.
The Node 2 Nader hatch window, we have the camera also routed there in case you want it. We see daylight between ourselves and the Dragon.
Thanks for sharing, and I'm not sure if Robo needs all the views they're using right now, but we appreciate your letting us know, Sonny.
We're recording it. We'll set it down afterwards if you want it.
I'm sure we'd all like to watch it. Thank you.
As you can see, Dragon has begun the process of being backed away from the International Space Station. Again, this is a ground-commanded maneuver. The robotics team here inside Mission Control is actually sending the commands to the station's 58-foot long. The crew, of course, is watching over this, but this is an automatic process and pre-programmed choreography to move this spacecraft back away from the station. But there you see the gap in between the Harmony node, which has been the home of Dragon for about 18 days. Our official unberthing time for the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft is 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, the vehicle being backed away from the International Space Station. The payloads teams are reporting that they're seeing good data on the Glacier. That is that freezer that has laboratory samples inside Dragon. They're going to monitor that through the majority of these operations to make sure that all the samples are staying basically cold. And they're seeing good data from that, which of course is good news. But there you get a good look of the station's robotic arm, 58 feet long, currently mounted to the Harmony node, and grappled Dragon is slowly backing it away. There on the far right-hand side is the Japanese Kibo laboratory. Back there on the left-hand side is the U.S. Destiny laboratory. That's the western coast of Africa, approaching underneath the International Space Station and SpaceX's Dragon. Altitude 263 miles. Are about to pass directly above Dakar, which, as a piece of trivia, actually used to be one of the shuttle's landing sites, transatlantic landing sites, back in the 1980s. The robotics team here in Mission Control has confirmed that Dragon's 150 centimeters away from the International Space Station. They're going to hold here while they rotate some solar arrays. It's a very methodical process to back the spacecraft away from the space station. Again, the majority of these commands that are being sent to both the space station arm and Dragon are being done from the ground. But the crew is watching over this in both the Harmony node, and soon they'll be going down to the cupola and taking a look out the windows at the spacecraft as they get ready to release it, coming up around 8:26 a.m. Central Time. And Dragon solar arrays being rotated around, being sent via command from Hawthorne, California. These two vehicles are currently 264 miles above Africa, right above Mauritania, heading up over Algeria. They'll be crossing over parts of the Mediterranean and then over almost directly above Rome here in just a few minutes.
I'm still station on 2.
Go ahead, Sunny. We're here.
Good morning. I'm just wondering if I could jump into the nanoracks a little earlier than planned. I see it's not blue box.
And Sunny, we're taking a look. Station Huntsville on Space to Ground 2 for nanoracks.
Go ahead.
Sunny, the nanoracks PD is on console, and we are ready to support you if you want to go ahead and get started with that activity.
Okay, we'll do that. And also just a question for Kevin. He was wondering if he could get the Elite setup going. Do you need to see the setup process, or are you good with the final configuration for setup?
And Sunny, we will want to be able to see that setup. We need to take a look at that Node 2 camera to verify it before we get into the protocols.
Okay, copy that.
As these two vehicles pass over parts of northern Africa, heading up over the Mediterranean, here's a look at the timeline again for today. The release is going to take place at 8:26 a.m. Central Time. Dragon will have a departure burn 1 minute later at 8:27, and then another one 2 minutes later at 8:29 a.m. Central Time. It'll have a yaw maneuver basically spinning around, which is the reverse of what it did coming up to the station at 8:35. It'll have a third departure burn at 8:36. It'll exit the keep out sphere at that point in time. And then by 8:54, it'll be more than 6 kilometers away from the space station. That should be about the time when we lose our views of Dragon. And that'll be when we'll end our coverage here on NASA television. Again, we're not going to have coverage at the splashdown live here on NASA TV. You'll have to visit nasa.gov/station and spacex.com to get confirmation of that.
Go ahead, Hansel, for Elite.
Yes, sir.
The Dragon also has a burn to reduce its apogee, which is the highest point of its orbit, at 9:22. That begins the process of setting up for the deorbit burn. That deorbit burn will take place at 1:28 p.m. Central Time.
To wait until
the trunk will be jettisoned. That is the bottom half of the spacecraft at 1:41 p.m. Central.
No problem at all.
Entry interface is about 2 minutes later at 1:43.
And thought maybe I'd get some things up.
Dragon's drogue chutes will be deployed at 2:11, and then the main chutes will be deployed at 2:12. And splashdown will be at 2:20, thereabouts.
Thanks for asking.
250 miles off the coast of Baja California. And it'll be 3:20 p.m. Eastern time. Again, for confirmation of the deorbit burn and splashdown, just log on to either SpaceX.com or www.nasa.gov/station. We'll have the updates there for you. But for now, we'll continue to watch as Dragon has been successfully unberthed and detached from the International Space Station. That took place at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, 7:19 a.m. Eastern. The ground teams here in Houston are continuing to work through the process to get it set up and in position for the actual release of Dragon. The crew will be doing that part of the maneuver. Aki Hoshide will be the primary robotic arm operator, with Sonny Williams backing him up. But there's a look eye to eye with Dragon as it continues to be backed away from the orbiting complex. These two spacecraft are now passing high above Russia at an altitude of 265 miles. We're about to lose our views here in just a few seconds, but we'll pick them back up a little bit from now. But Dragon is continuing to be backed away from the orbiting complex very slowly. This is a ground command that is being sent from here in Houston. The spacecraft is currently on the end of the space station's 58-foot-long robotic arm and is basically on its way to the release point. Again, that release coming up at 8:26 a.m. Central Time today. This team here in Mission Control continuing to watch over the International Space Station and listen in as the SpaceX team in Hawthorne, California monitors their vehicle. These teams have worked very close to one another for the last 2.5 weeks during these joint operations. These teams did have a chance to pass along some congratulations to Sunny and the rest of the crew during yesterday's DPC, that is the Daily Planning Conference. We're going to take a listen to that now.
Houston Station, Space to Ground 2. How about if we do the DPC on Space to Ground 2? And if you're ready for that, we are ready.
And Sunny, that's perfect. We are ready for the evening DPC, and we just want to say thank you so much for all the great work you've done today. Your teamwork and your puzzle skills were certainly put to the test, but the final result is a successful closeout of the Dragon. And that SpaceX team would really like for me to pass on their sincerest thanks for a job well done, not just today, but throughout their entire mission. They're looking forward to seeing Dragon come home and wish you the best in tomorrow's undock activities.
Wow, thanks. It was a pleasure for us to work with the Dragon team in Hawthorne, as well as the Dragon team in Houston, and of course all the payloads that are associated with that from Huntsville, and all our partners and all the science that's coming back home. It's a nice change from loading vehicles with trash to actually loading vehicles with stuff that's going to get looked at, analyzed, and used back home. So we really appreciated the challenge, and I think we were up for it, and we're happy to say we're complete with Dragon.
That's awesome, and you guys did a wonderful job. So your plans for tomorrow and the undock activities is on board. We do have a couple of go-backs for you this evening. The first one, as far as the VOK temp stow location, where you have it stowed overnight is just fine. The intent of the restow node originally was just to put it in the node 2 deck 3 location as a temp stow location, because you will have to access that equipment tomorrow. We will work with our specialists to find a permanent location and how we want to permanently restow these after your activities are completed tomorrow. How copy?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds good.
This is Mission Control Houston again. That was playback from yesterday, the daily planning conference. This happens at the beginning and the end of the crew's days when they have a chance to talk with the different ground teams about the day's schedule and talk about any questions that either the crews or the ground teams may have. But that was Capcom Kathy Bolt passing along some congratulations and thanks to the crew for all the work that they've done with Dragon and all the different cargo operations that they've had to do during a very busy time aboard the orbiting complex. The robotics officer here in Mission Control is just notified Flight Director Ron Spencer they're getting ready to continue the movement of the arm to get Dragon into the release position. This will be about a 15-minute maneuver to get it out there and get it outstretched away from the station and set up for this morning's release, which will take place at 8:26 a.m. Central Time, 9:26 a.m. Eastern. Of course, if this crew works as they usually do, sometimes these things take place a little bit earlier, but they do need to hit this pretty close to the targeted time because of the different lighting constraints that they need to have to see Dragon actually move away from the station. So it is timed pretty specifically, but we'll monitor the crew's progress once they get ready to go. But again, this is going to be a ground commanded maneuver to move the arm away from the station with Dragon on the end of it. And then the crew will take over at that point with Aki Hoshide and Sonny Williams down in the cupola, which is that sort of bay 360-degree window of the space station. It's got 7 different windows they can look out of. There's a robotics workstation that is down in there where they can control the arm, and that is where they will be with Aki Hoshide taking the lead and Sonny Williams backing him up. There's a second robotic workstation in the Destiny laboratory that is always up and running anytime we have these operations as sort of a hot backup in case the one in the cupola goes down. They can move to that one in the Destiny laboratory pretty quickly. Here's a look at the robotics workstation. You get a sense of what the crew can take a look at and what they can operate. There's a simple laptop there and different views of the cameras outside the station so they can see what they're working with. You see the crew command panel down there at the bottom right-hand side with the Dragon logo on it. That has some simple buttons that they can use to send a signal to Dragon if they need to. Dragon basically talks with the space station with the COTS UHF communication unit, or the Cuckoo, that is mounted in one of the racks there. Of course, that was tested out as part of NASA's COTS program, the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program, which was the original home of SpaceX as well as Orbital Sciences, as these two companies have worked to build and test these two cargo craft. Obviously, SpaceX with its Falcon 9 rocket and its Dragon spacecraft, and Orbital Sciences, which is getting ready to fly its first series of test flights coming up toward the end of the year and early part of next year with its Antares rocket and Cygnus cargo craft. Of course, the biggest difference between Cygnus and Dragon is that Cygnus is designed to burn up upon re-entry so that there's a lot of trash that can be put inside there and disposed of, just like the Progress and the ATV and the HTV. But Dragon getting ready to demonstrate one of its biggest benefits, which is the return of cargo coming up at the end of this mission. Dragon and the space station now flying over Mongolia. Their altitude is 260 miles. They're beginning a pass down to the southeast over parts of Indonesia and then just to the east of Australia. And then they'll come back up over South America again. But the team has sent the ground commands to continue to get Dragon set up for the release. It's about a 15-minute maneuver to get the arm into position. But the robotics officer here in Mission Control is in the process of working with her team to get these commands sent to the arm. And the crew is monitoring the progress and also working on some of their other daily activities at the same time. And once again, Sunny Williams, Aki Hoshide will be moving to the cupola here momentarily to get ready for their part of today's process, which is actually the release of it, which will take place at 8:26 a.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control, Houston. Again, the Dragon spacecraft is currently on the end of the station's arm, still grappled. The robotics officer here in Mission Control and her team are sending commands to the station's arm to extend itself out to get Dragon into the release position, which is roughly 30 feet away from the International Space Station. This is basically the same spot at which it was grappled back about 18 days ago.
Station Houston on 2 for Aki.
CJ, I think you read my mind.
Yep, Robo's complete with the maneuver, and we're ready for step 1 only of 1.320.
Okay, 1.320, step 1 only in work.
Thanks, Aki. We want to thank the crew for those views out the Node 2 CBM. That was really enjoyable to watch all that.
Awesome.
And Aki, just to clarify, and the very first thing in step 1, the hot backup is configured for MSS.
Okay, copy that very much.
This is Mission Control Houston. Just to confirm, the maneuver of the station's arm has been completed. So Dragon is pretty much at the release point. The ground team here has confirmed with the crew just a few minutes ago that both robotic workstations are up and running as expected. They're ready to do their job. The crew, Aki Hoshide and Sonny Williams, Aki being the lead person for this, will be moving down to the cupola workstation here shortly and getting ready to release Dragon coming up around 8:26 a.m. Central Time. There's a shot of where they're going to be working. And you get a sense of exactly how tight the quarters are there. Both of them can fit in there comfortably with the laptop there so they can monitor the timeline and what they're expected to do in the procedures. And they've got different monitors there, as well as the joystick that controls the station's arm. And there at the bottom right-hand side is the crew command panel, where they can actually send commands to Dragon, along with the ground teams in Hawthorne, California, who, of course, will be watching over these activities coming up over the next hour or so. There's a live look at the team there in Hawthorne, California. That control center there is on the same floor where this Dragon was born. One of the more unique aspects of SpaceX and its processes is that they actually build and test the spacecraft there at the same spot where their mission control center is. So this team can literally turn around and look out some glass windows and see the factory floor where this Dragon and the subsequent ones are being built. So the release time, 8:26 a.m. Central Time today. Dragon will have a series of burns, the first of which will take place at 8:27 to begin the process of backing it away from the orbiting complex. The second burn is at 8:29. There will be a yaw maneuver at 8:35 and another departure burn at 8:36. Dragon will cross over the keep-out sphere, which is an imaginary circle around the station at 8:36, the same time as that departure burn. It'll have reduction of its apogee, which is the highest point of its orbit, at 9:22. And then the deorbit burn several hours later, 1:28 p.m. Central Time. The trunk, which is the bottom portion of the International Space Station, will be, of the Dragon spacecraft, will be separated at 1:41 p.m. Central Time. Entry interface at 1:43. The drogue chutes will be deployed from Dragon at 2:11, and the main chute just a minute later at 2:12, with splashdown at 2:20. This live view from Dragon looking up at the International Space Station, and you saw PMA-2, the pressurized mating adapter number 2, sticking out there from the Harmony node. The SpaceX team currently sending commands up to Dragon to set up the inertial measurement units, which is part of Dragon's guidance and navigation system.
Houston Station on 2 for SSRMS. Step 1 is complete.
Okay, looks good, Aki. We're following along. Thanks.
Houston Station on 2, are we ready for SSRMS Dragon release prep?
Negative, Sonny. We'll stand by and we'll call you back when we are ready.
Okay, copy. Standing by.